Hello, I am going to do a little demo on carving your biomorphic abstraction. I I thought I had sent a notice for this out yesterday, but it's pretty obvious I did not. So this will be recorded and put up on our YouTube channel, and I will send everybody a link to it, and I hope this helps. I was supposed to send this out a few days ago. Sorry I was not able to do that. Once again, I wanted you guys to remember that the due dates are primarily to help you keep moving forward. You'll notice that I do not take points off when things are late, so I don't really want you to worry about that too much. I know that there's a couple people that weren't able to start until about a week after we got into this new term, and that's totally fine. As my experience with UVU students is that you guys are professional and you're able to do what you set your minds to doing when you commit to it. I did a video on what abstraction is a couple days ago, and I sent that to everybody. Biomorphic abstraction has to do with the idea of bio, which is life, and morphic, which has to do with body or form. And the biomorphic abstraction is less a block. You already have a block here. You don't need to carve it into a smaller block. Biomorphic abstraction is more about trying to find something interesting about the organic life around you and turning that into a 3D volume. Think like hip bones, knuckle bones, things like that, but not bones for anything that you really see in real life. I'm going to send everybody a link to Henry Moore sculpture that also has to do with art critiquing, and it gives you a good example of, you remember in that very first module where we talk a little bit about what art criticism is. It's not, when we use the word art criticism or the words art criticism, we usually think about tearing something down. What we're actually describing is a process of critical thinking applied to describing something that we see that's an art object. And the video I want to show you will serve two functions. One, it will show how to apply critical thinking to an art object. And two, it will be of an art object done by Henry Moore, which is a really good example of this biomorphic abstraction that I'm talking about. But I wanted to do a little bit of carving and show how to work with paper mache as well. And you guys all have these files in your kits, and these are really important to use. If you're not happy with your object or it feels too blocky, you can always carve it down and do more to it. That's not a problem at all. If you're not happy with the grade that you've gotten on any of the assignments, you can always redo the assignment and turn it in. You can adjust it, readjust it, ask me what I'm referring to. I think most of the parameters for grading are in the module itself. And if you are confused about that at all, please don't hesitate to get a hold of me. I will do my best not to ignore everybody. So you take your foam. This is a pretty good, solid, dense foam. And when we talk about things like biomorphic abstraction, again, what we're talking about is things like knuckle bones, organic shapes. What I'm going to do on this is just kind of do an outline in the foam of something that I want to carve. So here's a shape. I think I want to make like a little hole in it. I've got this little knife here. And we can, I'm smart enough to figure out how to open it up. We can open it up and start working with it. And I want to just, and this is stuff that you have in your kit. I am just going to kind of carve around the outline. And see if I can remove some of this stuff. Every once in a while, I am in the studio space at UVU. And if I get up, I go out of frame for just a second. It's because I'm going to go get some tools, different things like that that I need. Right, for right now, I'm going to run and go grab the garbage can. I'll be right back. There we go. The garbage can is invisible because I have a really nice screen thingamajig behind me that I don't know how to get rid of right now. For whatever reason, I don't know if you guys are experiencing any of it, but for whatever reason, it seems like some of the functionality of Canvas just does not seem to be working really well. And I don't know why that is. Working with knives, there's some really good safety rules to follow. I don't know what they all are, but I'm sure that they exist. I would recommend being very, very careful with everything that you do using any sort of supplies and tools in this class. If you're not paying attention, it's very easy to hurt yourself. So I've got that kind of rough shape idea of what I want to do. And now I'm trying to just get rid of the extra purple stuff. I don't want to, or I'm not going to intend to do a full sculpture for this demo. What I want to do is show some of the techniques and show how to get everything started so you guys can make some good headway. And like I said, or one of the nice things too about these kits that you have is we've got sandpaper in there. If you're not really happy with how smooth your paper mache is, you can always go back and sand it down and redo it. We're going to make this puppy, and then later on, we're going to revisit it. So again, like I said, if you're not happy with the grade that you're getting, so I am making a little bit of headway there. If you're not really happy with the grade that you've received on something, what's really nice is that you can go back and resubmit, redo. Several people have taken advantage of that already. Some of the photos that people have done, I noticed that several people accidentally sent the same photo twice in their selection of 5. And so I just said something about that, and as soon as I see the new photos, then I will adjust the grade, which I've done for several people already. One of the things that I like about the purple foams is that we do have some, I don't know if it's powdering or whatever. There are elements where a lot of foam stuff comes off. What is nice about this is that it's a lot easier to clean up than the blue foam that we were using in the previous term. This is more dense, so it doesn't seem to go everywhere. giving me a little bit of a hard time as I was trying to cut stuff away. I am making some headway. There we go. One of the things you may notice is that the shape that I made is not intended to be a dog or a cat or anything like that. It is intended specifically to be something that's abstracted. There is a little bit of talk about what's the difference between abstraction and non-objective. Abstraction is when you start with something that has an existence in a real world form. For example, this is based roughly on the shape of a hip bone. And that's the basis of the real world form. An example of non-objection or non-objectivism would be saying if I'm working with purely geometric shapes. For example, if I want to make cubes, there's not an awful lot in the natural world that organically is shaped like a cube. Maybe I want to work with stripes. Jasper Johns is a really good example of non-objectivism. He did a lot of paintings of target forms, for example. Another good example of non-objectivism is Sol DeWitt. A lot of the stuff that he did was he would actually write directions for people visiting the gallery to follow, and they would just essentially follow his directions. One of his famous pieces is called 1 and 3 Chairs, where you see a photo of a chair, you see the same chair sitting on a plinth, and then you see a poster that is a dictionary definition of a chair. Now, he did not make the chair. What he's dealing with is the idea of what is a chair. And working with an idea like that, even though you do see an actual chair, he didn't, like I said, he didn't make it. But working with something like that, it becomes non-objective because he's addressing an idea as opposed to working with an actual thing, starting in the real world. As you do this, be very careful with the knife. It is astonishing how easy it is to cut your own flesh. I work with glass most of the time, and just today, I injured myself on my finger. I don't know if you can see that. Boo-boo there. That I actually was stretching some metal, and the wound came from, oh, there we go. The wound came from the fact that the metal was a little resistant to the stretching, and the pliers that I was using to stretch it closed on my finger hard enough to pinch right through the skin. So it is really easy to hurt yourself. Okay, so I've got one line right there that you can see. I'm going to try to smooth this down a little bit. Like I said, be very careful. I don't want you guys hurting yourself. Let's see. I'm thinking I want to round that a little bit, just like that. I think that'll be nice. I'm also going to bring a little bit more of this down. I don't want to take you guys through the whole process of doing this. I'm basically just going to carve a little bit of this away and then show some of the process for it and then do some paper mache on it. And that will be the meeting for today. All right. So you can see that I'm carving that out. I'm trying to try to match it on this side as well. When you do this, it's a good idea to try to do it in an area that you can easily plug in a vacuum cleaner. You're going to need to use that to clean up a lot of the foam stuff if you already haven't figured it out or discovered that for yourself. When you cut with this knife, make sure that you never have a fleshy part of your body or your anatomy in the path of the carving. So don't cut like that towards your thumb. Notice that my hand is on the far side, away from the knife edge, and I am drawing the knife towards myself, but far enough away that if I slip, I'm not going to hurt myself. It is very important that you do not hurt yourself. And it's very easy to do that. So pay attention to where your fingers are all the time. Sometimes it's also nice when you're carving this to actually carve over a garbage can and file it down over garbage can. It's going to make it a lot easier to clean up. Okay, so here we see that form is starting to become known. And now I think what I want to do, I'm going to probably cut a hole right there and flatten this out a little bit. In the quiz, one of the things it talks about is why is carving very difficult? And most of you have done a really good job answering that. Carving is difficult because once you cut something off, you can't put it back on, or it's very difficult to put it back on. So if you screw up, I mean, you've got to just redesign your piece for the most part. I mean, we used to work with stone in this class, and you can imagine how difficult that would be to glue the stone back together. Anciently, in Rome, everybody and their dog and their little brother had to have one of those marble busts. Everybody loved that kind of stuff. And one of the ways you could tell that you had bought your thing from kind of like a cut rate studio was if they had used wax to hide the spots that they had carved out accidentally. Like if the student carving it or whoever accidentally chiseled a little bit extra marble off, you can't really glue it back on. What they would use was wax. And they would just melt the wax and kind of paint it into place. And then you could polish the wax so that it looks very similar to the polished marble. And studios really picked up on this pretty quickly, really good studios. And one of their advertising points was that they didn't use wax in the making of their sculptures. In Latin, the word for without is thin, and the word for wax, one of the words for wax, is cera. And so that was the birth of the word that we use today. The original word was sin cera, or without wax. And that became our word, sincere, which we associate today with being honest. And that all comes from the fact that when you carve something and you make a mistake, it's very difficult to recover. You can't, you just have to basically redesign your piece. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Crazy Horse Monument. It's in the Black Hills, just down the road a bit from Mount Rushmore. I think it's absolutely remarkable. Crazy Horse, that monument was designed by Eastern European artists, and his family are the ones who are carving it. And that it has had to change. They are carving this sculpture of Crazy Horse that is so big that the four figures in Mount Rushmore can fit in his face. But because they're carving the whole mountain, when they screw up, they have to basically just redesign the whole thing, not start from scratch. But they're not really screwing up. There are fault lines in the stone and stuff that they don't see until it's that aren't even revealed until too late. And so they've had to redesign and readjust the sculpture every once in a while, just to make sure that it fits, or that they can keep going when something happens, like a fault line shows up and the part that it was supposed to be the arm blows off. And if you get to see it, they're doing an incredible job, and there's absolutely no way that you would ever know that any of the stuff is had to be adjusted, just because they are so good at what they do that they can swivel and pivot when something breaks like that. But in that question, why is carving so hard? I think most of you got it right the first try, which is once you cut off, you can't stick on it. Now with this stuff, we could potentially glue something back in place, but it is such a pain in the butt process. And most of the glue that you use for something like this is going to really be very difficult to work with. Okay, so that's not taking too long. It is a little bit messy, but I'm able to get most of what I need, most of the extra cut off. So we're looking, so in my biomorphic form is kind of emerging. You kind of see that. Let's see. I'm going to do some curving. Am I doing time? Okay. This is going to be about an hour and a half long. Hopefully. And I am recording it. Everybody will be able to see it. Go. You can kind of see that this thing is now turning more round. It doesn't look like a block anymore. And I'm trying to make it, like I mentioned, I'm trying to make it look more like a bone, like a really weird bone than a block. Since I started with a block, I don't want it to keep looking like a block. And again, you'd see that I'm carving away from myself all the time. Working with glass, I cut myself off enough that it's not worth it to do it on purpose. So try to make sure. All right. That I am cutting away from myself so that I don't accidentally sliced my flash. Oops. All right. That's not looking too bad. So now we've got that form. I've been working on my cardboard from the kit. One of the things that you have in your kit is you have the big block and the little block. The little block is your base that you're going to be using, and you can attach your sculpture to the base with masking tape and, well, let's see, these things, skewer sticks. Just punch them through the base of the block into your sculpture. Okay, so I'm going to close my knife now. And I have the garbage can right here. I'm going to move this a little closer to me. There we go. I have my garbage can that I'm working over. And I'm going to start using the files to carve my foam. And you can get some pretty good, pretty strong grinding with these files very quickly. And I'll show you in just a sec. Okay, see that? That's just a little bit that I've done so far. What I want to do today is I want to grind enough of this down so you can see how much the files change the form of the foam. You can see kind of the organic biomorphicness of the abstract shape that I'm making. And then I want to make it smooth enough that I can apply the paper mache. We used to do this with stone, and I can imagine how long it would take. And then we thought, oh, what a great idea. Let's change it to plaster. And that seemed to work really well because that cut about 2/3 of the time off from the stone. But carving with plaster is very labor intensive as well. Now you can't see this, but as I'm grinding this away with my file, I'm changing the surfaces of the file. And then every once in a while, I will also tap this off because you see that foam has a tendency to fill up some of those areas in the file, and it makes it so it becomes less effective. But I can grind away large areas with the flat part of the file. I can use the round part of the file. I can use the round file to get some of these areas. I would recommend, as you do this, just try and see which is working best for you. So to carve some of this away, so I get rid of some more of the block shape of this. Now I am carving, this is in the garbage can, and what I'm carving is basically slivers off of this so I can change the side-to-side shape of this. Okay, so this is the front, and now I'm trying to carve a little bit of that back off so that this is not going to be quite so blocky all the way through. There we go. One of the nice things about doing a biomorphic abstraction is that if you are trying to carve like an animal, if you don't get it right, everybody can see that. But if you are doing an abstraction and you don't get it right, quote unquote, it doesn't matter because nobody can tell. You're not, so it really helps to get rid of some of the pressure you have a tendency to put on yourselves. All of you guys, artists, all artists on some level are perfectionists. And since this is a class where we are not setting out to make masterpieces, we're experimenting with the 3D forms, the 3D realm. I don't want you guys to put that kind of pressure on yourselves. So when you are making an organic, biomorphic, organic abstraction, if it doesn't look like a puppy or whatever, who cares? It's not supposed to be a puppy. It's supposed to be something completely different. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this. You know, if you're an illustrator, you've got to make something look like what people are expecting. A lot of the times when you paint, you're trying to make something look like what people are expecting. If you're making an organic abstraction, nobody's really going to care what it looks like. I want you to enjoy just playing with the form. And I'll show you what this looks like in just a second. So I carved some of that away, and you can see that it's looking different. It's not looking like a specific object. I'm not making a tube of toothpaste or anything like that. I'm just making something that I think looks kind of like a bone of some sort. All right, this is coming along well because I'm almost done carving this extra shape out. And I am doing this in the garbage can, which is a little inconvenient, but it also makes it a lot easier to clean up the mess. I'll make it slice and then I'll try to pull the foam off. And I'm trying to remember to set the knife down before I pull the foam off, because can you imagine how bad that would be if you accidentally slipped and the knife hit you as you were pulling the foam off? I laugh because it's happened to me. Working with glass, I've injured myself pretty severely a number of times, and I've cut the tips of 2 of my fingers off. They've grown back, so you can't even tell which fingers they were. But at the time that I cut them off, I remember saying some rather dramatic words. I was working on, I do book finding as well. And I was working on a book late at night. I was watching the old Dune, the one that was done in the 80s. And I was not paying attention to what I was doing. I was working with the scalpel. The scalpel went up and sliced through my thumb, and I cut halfway through my thumb. This was about 1:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden my 3 older girls were around me, helping me stop the blood flow and everything like that, and get everything calmed down. And then after the emergency abated and everybody's going back to bed, I was thinking of this as a miracle because it was 1:30 in the morning, nobody was awake. And suddenly all the kids were around helping me. So I asked them, that was amazing. How did you guys know to come and help me? Instead of answering me directly, one of my daughters said, Dad, that must have really hurt. I said, well, yes, it did. How did you know that? And she said, because you shouted the F word 3 times. The moral of the story is pay attention to what you're doing when you're working with a knife. And it's okay to use words like that when you sever something. Okay, so pretty quickly you can see that I'm transforming that block that I started with into something very organic and very different. I think I want to do a hole through this as well. I'm not really comfortable with necessarily cutting the hole with this thing all the way through. So what I think I'm going to do is start the hole with it as kind of cutting out a cone, and I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm trying to be very careful because again, I don't want to cut myself. I don't want to. There we go. Oops. All right, so I'm cutting this area. I'm trying to make something of a hole. I'm going to use this file as something of a lever. Something like this, you got to be really careful because if you do it wrong, you can break the whole foam. And if you do that, your sculpture suddenly becomes a lot smaller. And if it does happen to you, just do the best you can anyway, and then use your skewer sticks to hold it back together again. And when you apply the paper mache, you can make it all look like it's one piece again. Okay, so this is how my hole is starting to look. And trying very hard so that I do not hurt myself. I don't want you guys to hurt yourself at all. Okay, so the hole is coming along nicely. You can see that it's coming out. I just want you to kind of play with these tools that you have. Again, since we're not making a puppy or specific fruit or a portrait of somebody we know, it really takes a lot of the pressure, self-pressure that we apply off, so you can just kind of enjoy the medium for what it is. Now I'm just kind of chewing up the middle of this area, just carefully, trying to make sure that the pressure is only applied to the areas that I want to get rid of so that I don't damage the whole thing. And I'm using the file instead of the knife because if I slip, it's not going to hurt me as much. But you can see that hole is getting a little bit deeper. There we go. It's starting to break through. now I'm starting to develop the hole. And I'm trying to use the file to grind the edges down. So again, I don't hurt myself, for one thing, but also so I don't accidentally cut all the way through the pour foam sculpture and destroy what would be so hard to make. I'm using that file to kind of grind the sides of the hole down to make it a little bit smoother. And I will use it in just a second to smooth that out more. Okay, so can we see that? The hole is coming along nicely. Now I'm going to grind the edges a bit. So I have that more organic kind of bone type feel to it. And I think pretty soon I'll be able to start applying paper mache to this. Now you can see that. Hi, this is coming along nicely. Now I'm doing short strokes as I get around the hole. That way I don't end up damaging the areas that I want to keep on the far side of the hole from where the end of my file is. It's really important that you pay attention to what you're doing. Pay attention to what the file is doing. If you push too hard, if you strain the material too much, it will break. And again, that's a pain in the neck to work with. We don't want to break this unless we're removing parts that are intentional. So you see how I'm rounding that off? Right now, I'm using the flat part of the file to kind of shape it somewhere. I'm not trying to make it symmetrical. You can tell that it's not symmetrical. I'm trying to smooth it down so that the forms feel like they're flowing into each other. What's nice about doing this in the garbage can is I've been able to mitigate the mess quite a bit and keep it rather localized. When you do this on carpet, you probably already found out that that's probably not the best place to do it, but vacuums are really good for cleaning this kind of stuff up. I've also found that if you need to sweep it up or brush it off the table, the best thing that you can do before you do that is squirt it with some water, because you'll find that squirting it with water helps to kind of mitigate the static cleaning effect of this stuff. Okay. All right, this is coming along well. So just from that little bit of carving with the file, I'm getting this rounder, a lot smoother. Now we have, I think everybody has one of these splatter files. Then you also have the round file as well. And the round file is so that you can get a lot of tight detail if you want to. And again, these are supposed to be organic shapes. You're not making mechanical processes. We're not making dogs or cats or things that people will recognize. We are trying to make something that's organic, that looks vaguely biological, but we want to make sure that it's not something that people can look out the window and see, for example, because if we screw up, we want to be able to pivot and make something new in spite of our screw up. Like I think it's Bob Ross who said, there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. And that's I just don't want you in this class to put so much stress on yourself that you feel you need to throw everything away and start over again just because it doesn't look like what you had intended from the beginning. A lot of the times, some of the more interesting things happen as we pivot and adjust to the mistakes or the happy accidents that occur as we're learning a new process. I'm sure all of you have stories about that. I think a very difficult thing that most of us have to deal with as artists is this idea of making something quote unquote perfect. Perfection is not how something looks, that it looks mechanical, that it looks like a machine made it. That's just something for a machine to do. Perfection actually means whole, complete. And it has a lot more to do with honesty than having something look mechanical. So that's why I'm saying I want you to make something that's organic, and that if you quote unquote screw something up, or if it breaks wrong, then you can pivot. Because that's what we want to do. We want to learn from the process and enjoy the process, as opposed to get mad at ourselves because it doesn't look like a puppy or whatever on the first try. The materials that we use in this class, most of you, it's going to be the first time you ever touch it. So if you're not, if you don't make something exactly the way you want to the first go around, it doesn't matter. In fact, it would surprise me more if something turns out exactly the way you want it first time you try it. That'd be really startling. All right, so I cut a little bit more off. Now we have something that definitely is not symmetrical. I'm going to grind that down a little bit more. I'm hoping that it's at a place right now where I can start using paper mache to smooth this out. I'm thinking this thing is more like a cross between a hip bone and one of those little teeny tiny bones that you find in somebody's ear. I'm trying to make it, like I said, organic and not symmetrical. I think it is a real achievement when you can make something that is completely symmetrical, but I don't want to be, since this is a relatively new material for most everybody, I don't want you to be upset if things aren't symmetrical. Okay. No, we're almost there. Almost to a point where I can start applying the paper mache. Everybody got a Tupperware container or a plastic container with a bag of flour in it and some glue. Those things are really important. The third material that you need to apply to that to make the paper mache goo compound is just water. And everybody should have several pieces of newspaper in their project kit as well. And those pieces of newspaper, that's what we will tear up to make the paper mache strips. Okay, we are almost done with that. So on this, I am trying to sand down all the surfaces that were originally on the exterior from the original block. Will be present when I start covering this with paper mache. I am in the art room right now, so if the video loses a little bit of coherency, sometimes the signal just isn't as consistent as one might hope in this room. But we're doing our best. Okay, I'm almost done. I'm almost there. You see how much this form is shaped from that has changed from that original block that I started with. Like I said, we're not making a smaller block. We're trying to do the organic form so that we don't have any of that block appearance left. When you do clean your files, that's not a good idea to spray them with water at all because it'll rust. What you do want to do is try to tap them out, and then you can even stick them down or vacuum them off as you're cleaning up, or tap them out several times in the garbage can. Wipe them with a damp paper towel. Okay. And tap it with another pink. Using my knife. Now, tap this guy off. Now, for you, I would like you to use the sandpaper and get it as smooth as you can. And I will demonstrate, but I'm going to use this form now to start applying my paper mache, so I can show you that before our time together is done today. I'm going to take a paper towel and get it just a little bit wet and use that to wipe off some of the extra dust from this. If I get this a little bit wet, doesn't really matter because I'm going to be covering it with the paper mache just a little bit. And covering it with the paper mache is going to get it wet anyway. So, if it gets a little bit wet now, who cares? Okay, so there we go. That's a good start. I'm going to move the computer a little bit, and I'm going to get my cardboard mat that I've been using. I have this right here. Now, I'm going to start mix some paper mache in this container. The lid on it is designed so that if you don't use up all your paper mache the first time you mix it, that's totally fine. You can put the lid on and come back to it. All right, so I'm going to use about half of the flour that I have. I'm going to pour about half of it in to this container. Well, actually a little bit less than that. I'm just going to show you about the, actually that's the wrong way to do it. I'm sorry. I'll pour the flour back into this bag. What we want to actually do is put the glue, pour about half the glue into the container first. The reason is you're going to match the volume of glue with water. Okay. And you're going to use about the same amount of volume of flour as you have glue in there too. So it's about, by volume, it's about 1 to 1 to 1, roughly. You're going to make something that, I don't know if you've ever had like a McDonald's milkshake or a Frosty that is starting to melt. You have that kind of gooey consistency, and that's the kind of thing we want to go for. So this is how much glue I've got in there. And I'm going to pour, I'm going to do about that volume of water. Now, one thing before you start mixing this, so I hope you watch the video first. Before you start mixing this, it's a good idea to have something that you can use to mix it with. In my case, I don't have anything else. I'm just going to use my hand. I think that most normal people, that's probably going to be a bad idea. So now I'm going to put about the same volume of flour in there. About like that. And now I'm going to start mixing it up. Now I'm not making an awful lot of this because I'm doing a demo on the carving. And so, but yeah, what I'm going to do now is just kind of mix this. And if you use like the whisk that you get from like a DI or something like that, that's probably the best thing. If the flour is a little bit, you put a little bit too much flour in there and it makes it a little bit thick, you can thin it out with a little bit more water. I put a little bit too much flour in, and I'll thin it out with a little bit of water. One thing I like about this recipe is that it works even if you don't get everything exactly right. And what we're trying to do is get it to that consistency of like a McDonald's milkshake. So not really super thick, but not really milky. And if there's a little bit of lumps, that's fine. You're going to get as many of the lumps out as you can. And then as you use the paper mache, the lumps are going to go away as well. So we want to get it. So this is kind of gross. You can probably tell it's kind of gooey. It's not quite the same consistency as the glue. It's a little bit thicker than that, and that's fine. What I like about this glue is that it makes for a very durable project when you're done. But what's bad about it is that if you spill it, if you don't clean it up right away, it's going to be a really, really big pain in the neck to try to clean up later. We want to make sure that you don't leave a mess when you make this, and if it accidentally spills. So again, after you make your project, you want to start making the paper mache and coating this with paper mache. The point of this is to make your foam durable and to give it a texture that is a lot more finished than just the sanded foam, just the carved foam. Because what we're going to be doing later is we will be revisiting this and painting on it. Yeah, I want to apply just a little bit more water to it, thin it out just a little bit. If you do start adding stuff, just add a little bit at a time, don't add a whole lot. It's always easier to add stuff than to take it away when you're mixing something like this. Okay, I think that's a pretty good texture. Now I'm going to, it's not really free of lumps right now, but it doesn't look too bad. I'm gonna wipe my hands off a bit. Good thing to do with this is to have a big stash of paper towels next to you. Use those to wipe your hands off because you do not want to get this down in the sink at all. If you need to wipe your hands better, get more paper towels. And then after you get all of it off with the paper towels, then you can wash. But I would still wash it off outside with a hose or have an extra supply of water that you're using to wipe it off with. You don't want to put it down the sink at all. When you tear your newspaper, the newspaper usually has a grain that's in the direction that it was printed or rolled. And if you find that grain, then you can tear long strips relatively easily, like I just did. So I'm going to make these maybe about 4 inches long. And this will be enough to give a good demonstration of the paper mache. So these strips, I tore it. See that? Tore top to bottom on this. It just depends if whichever way you're tearing it. If it doesn't tear in a long strip, just find tear at the right angles to what you just tried, and then you will get your strips. All right. Now notice I didn't put those in the paper mache yet. What I'm going to do is take a strip, put it in the paper mache, and I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to kind of squeegee with my fingers off. And then I'm going to use that and apply it to my sculpture. Okay. And as I apply it, I'm going to kind of squeegee more of the glue out as well. This does a couple things. One is it gets rid of some of the extra glue, but it also helps to squish the glue that's on the far side of the paper into your foam. So it is a better adhesion. Now, one thing that you'll notice is as I'm putting this on, maybe one end or the other will start wanting to flap free. And that's fine. If that happens, I'm going to take another strip. I'm going to lay it in the paper mache, squeegee the extra off. And then this, I'm going to overlap on that previous strip that I just laid down. And I'll use that to kind of hold the other piece in place. And if you overlap the strips, what's going to happen, and then you start squeegeeing the glue around, it's going to give you a lot tighter cohesion. And when you overlap the strips, it's going to hold the previous, the subsequent strips that you put down are going to hold the previous strips. You see that? I'm just going to keep doing that, and each time I get a little bit of a strip, again, you want to work on an area. I have this cardboard underneath me that I'm working with. You do not want to work on directly over carpet. You don't want to work on the table. You want to have something that protects whatever surface you're working on from the glue that you can clean up easily. Typically, I will, if I don't have cardboard, I'm going to use like full sheets of newspaper to protect my work surface. So each time I do this, I am trying to smooth it out as best as I can. And you will see little air bubbles forming between your foam and the paper. But as you continually squeegee with your fingers, you'll get rid of most of those air bubbles, and you'll get a surface that is going to be forming smoothly, as you can see. So I have 8 strips or so, and that's what I'm going to use for the demo. And after I do that, then I'm going to use my paper towels that I have here to clean off my fingers and not wash them off in the sink. Now, when you are doing this, forming the strips around different shapes, if I have like really narrow grooves, or small grooves or small forms, I'm going to make narrower strips. And I may even make little patches that I use, like little 1 inch by 1 inch or even ½ inch by ½ inch patches. Because the idea is I want to coat the whole surface with the newspaper as tight as possible, making it as smooth as I can get it. And the way to do that is to squeegee the paper in place, but also if I'm trying to make the paper conform to tighter areas, I'm going to just tear the paper smaller. So use narrower strips or smaller pieces depending on the size and shape of the area that you're trying to cover with the paper mache. You're going to be experimenting with this. You can see that I'm also squeegeeing this out over my container of paper mache because I want whatever excess there is to, as much as possible, fall back into that container so I can keep using it. Now I'm noticing also that there are some wrinkles that are showing up, and you can kind of see that. So I'm going to use my fingers to kind of squeegee that out a little bit, but that's also why you have the sandpaper, so you can squeegee that out. Now you're going to only use the sandpaper, of course, after this dries. You don't want to there we go. You don't want to use the sandpaper when the paper mache is still wet. This stuff dries fairly quickly. So if you apply the paper mache in the evening, then the next day, the next morning, you'll be able to go at it and sand it down. It'll be dried pretty quickly. If you can't get the whole thing coated the first time or the first session you're doing, that's fine. That's why you have a lid for this container. But when you go back to use the paper mache again, make sure that you stir it up again, because otherwise all the glue is actually a little bit heavier than the water, and it will settle out and make it very difficult to make another batch of paper mache. Okay. You see how I'm smoothing this out? It's kind of squeegeeing it with my fingers. As you're doing this, try to remember not to pick your nose, because the glue will get in your nose and can irritate the tender areas of your sinuses. There we go. So I am trying to get the stuff off my fingers, but also I don't really mind too much that it's on my fingers, because I can use that to kind of squeegee things out and smooth them out and make the areas a little bit nicer and smoother. And sometimes, depending on what you carved, it may be really difficult to get the whole thing coated at one time, and that's totally fine. That's one of the reasons why you can come back, or why you may need to come back, is say the top part of it is, or the front part of it, or the side part of it is what you coat first, and then when you come back, you can coat the second part of it. You can also see that some of these are radiating out from the center, and that is so I can get better cohesion of the paper and paper mache to the actual form. And I just want you to experiment a little bit. As you do this, maybe some of the paper you may have to throw one of the strips away that you're working on and tear some new ones, or whatever you need to do. It doesn't really matter. I want you to, the object is to coat the foam as well as you possibly can, as smoothly as you can, with the paper mache. Whatever you need to do. Maybe this is going to take 3 sessions, and that's fine. Some people get really excited about how smooth they can make it, and they will coat it in one session and sand it down, and then do a second coat on top of the sanded area, and that's totally fine. Whatever you want to do is going to be the thing that works. Well, not necessarily. I want you to experiment and find out what is going to work, and it may not be what you expect. After I'm going to put this, a link to this video as well in that the module that this is for, so you'll have that reference too. When this dries, it's going to change color a little bit, not an awful lot. It's going to be a little bit more translucent and a little bit more yellow. And after it dries, then you can go back and sand it down if you need to, and apply more paper mache. But you can see how I'm getting this. Sometimes the paper doesn't want to do exactly what I'm hoping it'll do. That I was scouring it a little bit because when I tried squeegeeing it, I moved the paper the wrong way. It wrinkled up when I didn't want it to. And that's just part of the process, working with and pivoting what happens. And I'm also squeegeeing areas that have like holes in the foam. Trying to work the glue in that. It'll make it so that when I apply paper mache later, it'll fill up some of those holes and make it a little bit easier to make the whole piece smooth. Okay, I just have a couple more strips to apply, and then we'll wind up the demonstration. This is still pretty lumpy, but by the time I come back to it later, most of those lumps will be gone. And the lumps have a tendency to dissipate as well as I'm working with this, because every time I pull a piece, put a piece of paper in the paper mache and squeegee the glue, that helps to get rid of some of those lumps, lumps of flour. I'm doing a really good job here. I'm not picking my nose or scratching my ear or anything. Again, this glue is really a pain in the neck to clean up. And if you get it like in your sinuses or your nasal passages or your little bits of hair on the back of your hands, it can really suck to clean up. So you don't want to do that. It doesn't taste as nearly as good as what you might expect. Okay. You can see, yeah, it is messy, but as I'm squeezing this, you can see how smooth it is getting that. I mean, it's doing a really good job of smoothing everything out. I'm trying really hard to pay attention if a piece is coming up or I see an air bubble, I'm trying to work that out. It's a lot easier to work that out now than to try to do that kind of work after it dries. So you want to get this, you want to do a little bit at a time so that you can kind of manage these areas. You can kind of manage the strips. If you try to do too much of this, what will end up happening is some of the strips that you put on earlier may start bubbling off a little bit, and then that makes it a lot more difficult to smooth it out because you've already moved on and it's starting to dry. So I think maybe 8 or 10 strips at a time is probably good. And you also notice that after about this length of time, what will start happening is that the glue will start sticking to your skin and it starts feeling really disgusting. Unless you enjoy that kind of feeling. I personally don't. I may have when I was a lot younger, when I would eat with my hands and get spaghetti sauce everywhere, and as it would dry, kind of rub it into my hair. But I haven't done that for, at least 5-6 months. Okay, I was smoothing that down a little bit because those ends of those strips started pulling up. Okay. And so here's the last strip that I want to do. And when you set this down to dry, what you want to do as well is pay attention to the wet areas, because they will stick very definitely and very securely. So as I'm doing this, when I set this down, I want to kind of set it down in such a way so that the glue isn't going to puddle and glue it to whatever surface I'm setting it down on to dry. All right, so this is, okay, I'm just going through and I'm kind of squeegeeing some areas. The stuff that's collected on my fingers, I'm going to use to kind of fill in a couple holes in the foam. But there we go. And you can kind of see how I've done that. I've kind of smoothed it out. And I see some areas where the paper's kind of separated a little bit. I'm just going to go over that. And if I come back and I find that some of those areas have bubbled up and separated and now they're hard and crisp, I can sand that down and then fill in the holes and gaps and cover it up with subsequent layers of paper mache. See that? I'm going to set that down. I'm going to use my paper towels to wipe off all the goo on my hands. Oh, I should have said too, it's a really good idea to take off all your rings before you do this. And again, wash this out or wash it off with wipes, paper towels, get all that glue off your hands. Do not put any of this in the sink at all. That just makes a huge mess that is just not worth it. I don't know how long it takes for you to get maintenance to come to your apartment, but if you get the glue in the sink, it will clog up the pipes and your landlord would not appreciate that at all. Here in this building, we found the record, the longest time it took for maintenance to come and unplug a sink was 2 years. So we tried very hard not to get any of this down. I don't know if that's the case. I like to tell people 2 years because then they have a tendency to listen when I tell them don't pour the glue down the sink. Okay, now I'm going to put the lid back. I don't know if you saw it. I just used the paper towel to wipe the rim of this so that the lid isn't going to stick to it. And I did get most of that stuff off my hands. I'm going to get a little bowl of water, not an awful lot of water because I'm going to, after I get all the glue off, I'm going to pour that water into a garbage can and let the water kind of evaporate in the garbage can. So I'm not going to get an awful lot of, but that's what I'm going to use to get the rest of the glue off my fingers. Oh, that is so good, gross. And it's still, I tried to be careful, but I'm still removing some hair, and that is unpleasant. Oh well. So that is what we want to do with the paper mache. So we've carved the foam into an organic, a biomorphic form. That's an abstraction. This does not look like a real thing at all. And then I showed you how to mix the paper mache and how to make the paper strips and apply that to our sculpture that we just carved. The next module, I will be releasing that this week, but the next module is going to talk about color. And we're going to talk about a couple other things. We're going to talk about texture. And then after a couple of weeks, we're going to come back to this form that we're making with the paper mache, and we're going to apply color to it, and we're going to apply texture to it and make it into something new. Right, so if you guys have any questions about this after you watch the video, email me, and the next video, which we're going to do in just a couple days, I will address all those questions, or as many of them as I can. All righty? I hope you guys have a good evening or day whenever you watch this video, and hopefully this helps quite a bit. All righty. Thank you for sitting through this demonstration. Hope you enjoyed it at least half as much as I did doing it for you. My hands are still really goopy and nasty. Cleaning it off is probably the best part of the whole art process. Not really, I'm being sarcastic. If you guys have any questions, like I said, email me, and I will address them in the next video. All right? Thank you so much, and I hope you have fun with this. Again, don't put any pressure on yourself to try to make something that other people recognize. The whole idea of doing a biomorphic abstraction is doing something that's enjoyable as you work with this medium that is most likely new to most of you. I am going to stop the recording now and deliver this video to you just as soon as I can. Thank you so much.